We have a major update regarding Imelda, which is forecasted to become a hurricane off the coast of Florida over the next few days, and this could bring some serious impacts, including significant and life-threatening flooding to areas like the Carolinas and Georgia, high winds, and even storm surge. Additionally, Hurricane Humberto has become a Category 5 hurricane over the last 12 hours, and this thing is forecasted to continue to intensify later today. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about Imelda and as well as Humberto in the Atlantic Ocean. So let's jump right into what's happening across the Atlantic right now with Imelda and Humberto, beginning with Imelda, which is a very disorganized tropical system over the Bahamas and Cuba. This is just off to the east of Florida, and this is forecasted to gradually intensify over the next couple of days as it moves in the direction of South Carolina and North Carolina, and then from there is a big question mark on where it's exactly going to track in this forecast. We're going to talk about what I think is going to happen over the next couple of days, but there's three scenarios that are still at play, one of which is that it turns out to sea pretty quickly. There's another one where it kind of loops around or even stalls just south of South Carolina, which would pose a major flooding threat, or a lower end scenario at this point where it makes landfall into either Georgia or South Carolina. So there's still three scenarios at play. And then off to the east is Hurricane Humberto, which has become a very powerful Category 5 hurricane. So far this hurricane season, all three hurricanes that we've had have all been Category 4s or 5s, and this one is no exception. It is forecasted to continue to move off to the northwest over the next few days, and then eventually it'll turn out to sea, not before bringing some impacts to areas like Bermuda, and this also will play a factor into exactly where Imelda is going to track over the next few days. Now let's talk more about where exactly Imelda could track over the next few days, as this is going to have the biggest implications on what we are going to experience in the United States in terms of flooding, storm surge, and high winds. Beginning with our ensemble members, which is basically spaghetti models here. We're basically just looking at a bunch of different models in one graphic to give you an idea of where the system could track. I'm going to show you two different sets of ensemble members for a reason. So this is what it looks like as we go into Monday evening. We are expecting that Imelda will just be off the east coast of Florida. It's actually going to be relatively close, and it's going to be close enough where we actually will feel at least some impacts along the immediate east coast from about Port St. Lucie back through Daytona Beach. This is where we currently have tropical storm watches in effect from the National Hurricane Center, where there could be some outer bands and also some gusty winds. Very minor storm surge is a possibility. Now Tuesday is really going to be the biggest day when it comes to Imelda. This is the biggest turning point. There are three scenarios on hand. The first one, which is the most likely one, has about a 50% chance of happening, is that Imelda will actually turn out to sea fairly early. That is mainly because Imelda is moving so slowly right now in the very far southwestern parts of the Atlantic Ocean near Cuba, where this will actually be pulled more than likely out to sea because of Humberto. So this is the more likely scenario at this point. With that said, there would still be some impacts in the Carolinas that we'll talk more about here in a second, and even Georgia and Florida. The second scenario is about a 30% chance. That is where it stalls just offshore and is slow, and then eventually turns out to sea by the middle and end of the week. This could pose a major flooding risk across Georgia, far northeastern Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Now, the 20% scenario is where this actually makes landfall into South Carolina, which is not very likely at this point, but this is the scenario where it would be much more devastating when it comes to a flooding risk, as we would have significant and major flooding across inland areas even of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And then Humberto, very likely that this thing's going to turn out to sea. Humberto is the easiest thing to forecast here because it is just so powerful. That Imelda has a bit more of a difficulty here because it could be steered out by Humberto. It could also be steered out by upper level troughing across the United States and even a ridge that's off to the north. There are so many more factors with Imelda, which makes this much more difficult to forecast. Now, this is pretty interesting. We've been showing this over the last few videos, but this is an AI generated ensemble member group, and this one has shifted dramatically over the last 24 hours, where it has 0 ensemble members getting anywhere close to the Carolinas or Georgia. Now, this one's been very back and forth. It's had a bit of a windshield wiper effect, but this one has had a dramatic shift over the last 12 hours, showing almost every single model is dragging this out to sea, which would once again be because of the nature that Imelda is moving so slowly right now over the Bahamas. And as long as that continues to move very slowly, it is more than likely going to be pulled out to sea. If it can somehow speed up, or in another case where it actually drags further to the west, it would have a harder time being pulled out, which is still a scenario, which is why I'm continuing to reiterate that there is still a possibility of landfall, and there is still a possibility of major impacts even along the east coast, which we're going to talk more about what those impacts could look like in all sorts of different scenarios in just a moment. And before we go into all the scenarios, I just want to quickly run through the National Hurricane Center's forecast on both Imelda and Humberto, which have dramatically changed over the last 24 hours. Only 24 hours hours ago is when Imelda was forecasted to go inland over towards South Carolina or North Carolina, or at least clip the coastline. Now it's changed a lot, where it actually is bending much faster. By Tuesday is when they are forecasting this to turn from going north and then eventually going to the east. This is also when we're expecting this to become a hurricane. So by Monday night, this could be a hurricane just to the east of the Treasure Coast of Florida, which is once again why there are tropical storm watches in effect. We also have tropical storm warnings in effect all across the Bahamas, and then eventually by Wednesday and Thursday is when they are forecasting this to turn out to sea. Now again, there are still other scenarios at play, as I just reiterated. We could see this loop, or we could see this even stall just off the coast of the Carolinas, which would have major implications of the impacts that could be felt in the United States. Then beyond Thursday is when there's a lot of uncertainty. We'll get to that in another video. More than likely this will go towards Bermuda. It could also loop back and kind of do some weird stuff, but at this point it's too early to go into those details. We really got to figure out what's going to happen over the next 48 hours before we start guessing what's going to be happening by the end of the week. Also, this is the official forecast on Humberto, which is forecasted to stay as a major hurricane all the way through Tuesday night. It'll be awfully close to Bermuda. We definitely have to watch Bermuda very closely Monday and Tuesday for potential impacts out of Humberto. Then it'll eventually speed up and turn right out to sea. Now, what's going to be happening over the next few days, once again, is Imelda and as well as Humberto are going to be tracking very close to each other. The Fujiwara effect's going to be at play here, as we have two low pressure systems very close to each other, so they're going to be kind of dancing around a little bit, which is why there's some weird interactions and also weird scenarios once again with Imelda. Now let's talk more about the scenarios that could evolve with Imelda over the next few days, and this is the future radar with the European model. As we go into Monday afternoon, Imelda will just be to the east of Florida, most likely as a strong tropical storm, even possibly a low-end hurricane by that point. On Tuesday, Imelda is going to start to be attracted by Humberto. With how slowly it is moving off to the north, there is a good chance that these two low pressure systems will be just so close together that we are likely going to see Humberto pull Imelda away. That means it'll likely turn off to the east as we go into Tuesday. The only thing that'll change that at this point is if Imelda speeds up or if it stays further to the west. That could have implications down the road. So this is not a forever 100% scenario here that we are definitely going to see this happen, but the odds of this being pulled out to sea before ever making major impacts to the United States are definitely increasing. With that said, we will likely still see some impacts, especially along the Carolina coastlines in Georgia on Tuesday, which could include some minor storm surge, and on top of that, coastal flooding, beach erosion, and even some flooding is definitely going to be in play with this particular system, even if it were to stay this far offshore. So that's something that we still need to talk about, and we will talk about here in just a moment. The GFS model, which is a model that has been hinting that this would be making landfall, actually has a very interesting trend. The GFS model has this staying further to the west by quite a bit from most other models. It actually has it almost near Florida as we go into late tomorrow night, close to Cape Canaveral on Monday. So some of the outer bands and even some tropical storm force winds would be in play if it were to track further to the west. The other thing that's interesting about this is that it does kind of stall on Tuesday, at least for a brief amount of time, just to the east of Florida, before eventually being pulled out by Humberto on Wednesday and Thursday. So this is another interesting scenario. The GFS also stays much further down to the south compared to the European model, which is a little bit further to the north, which would also mean that the impacts in the Carolinas would not be nearly as significant. So two very interesting scenarios here. There are other scenarios at play that are lower chances of happening, that would be kind of looping around near South Carolina or making landfall. Again, the odds of those are not nearly as high as this just turning out to sea. I do want to reiterate though, models have been going back and forth, and we could see changes again as Tropical Storm Imelda becomes more organized over the next 48 hours. There could be some shifts again, and if there are any, we will be the first to let you know, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon so you're notified with the latest updates. Now, one of the biggest concerns that we've been talking about over the last few days with Imelda is the risk of flooding. This is the latest from the European model in terms of the flooding risk, and notice it's not nearly as significant as what it showed before. We're looking at a widespread 1 to 4 inches of rain up and down the Carolina coastlines and also through Georgia, with some localized areas likely closer to 6 to 8 inches of rain, which is still significant, and there could be localized flooding once again. This is definitely something that you need to be preparing for Tuesday and even as early as Monday night in those areas. Up and down the Florida coast, 1 to 3 inches of rain is likely. GFS model is a little bit further to the west, doesn't really show much of a difference though in rainfall totals along the east coast of Florida. It also shows pockets of 3 to even 5 inches of rain in parts of South Carolina near Myrtle Beach and also southern North Carolina, but keeps the worst of the rainfall offshore. And then this is a combination of a bunch of different models, also just the Weather Prediction Center's forecast. They are indicating a pretty good chance right now of 1 to 3 inches of rain for most of South and North Carolina near the coastline. Inland areas, most likely anywhere from 1/10 of an inch of rain up to maybe 1 inch or 2 is going to be a possibility. But again, we are probably going to avoid worst case scenario, assuming that we do not see landfall in the United States or any major changes over the next 24 to 48 hours. As I've mentioned before, there is a chance that this could change again. I just want to keep reiterating that because of how complicated this scenario is with the Fujiwara effect, where we could see this low pressure system do something weird here over the next 24 hours and have it shift further to the west or even speed up. That is totally in place, so continue to watch the weather very closely. We will have another video possibly as early as this afternoon. If not, we'll have another one tomorrow morning with the latest details and if there are any major changes to the forecast. Now, I have created a graphic to give you an idea of who should be preparing, staying aware of, or even taking action for upcoming Hurricane Imelda, and I have added a small little area where you should be taking action. That is anywhere in the pink, which is basically on the immediate coastline of South and North Carolina. The only reason why I've added this area is because of the localized flooding risk and the possibility of storm surge. There will maybe be some tropical storm force winds as well, assuming that this does continue to stay further out to sea as a lot of models and also the forecast is currently showing. Again, if there's any changes to the forecast, this graphic will definitely change. And then if you're anywhere in the red, this is where you should be preparing for Imelda. This goes from Port St. Lucie, Florida, all the way back towards Cape Hatteras over in North Carolina. This is primarily if the track changes of Imelda. You just want to be making sure that you have a hurricane plan ready to go. Again, there's a very unlikely chance at this point that this will be making landfall in the United States. With that said, if there's any changes even slightly further west or north, we could have a major flood threat evolve along this entire area. Anywhere even inland in South Carolina could still deal with those problems. Also along the Florida coastline, there are already tropical storm watches in effect. This is an area that there could be some tropical storm force winds on the very low end spectrum, and then perhaps a little bit of low end storm surge. And then anywhere in the orange, I would still be staying aware of this situation. The odds of impacts in these areas have definitely dropped quite a bit, but this is still an area that I'd be keeping an eye on the National Hurricane Center's forecast. I'll be keeping an eye here on our channel. Make sure that you are subscribed here to the Max Velocity channel in case there are any big changes to the forecast. We could have an emergency update later this afternoon, but if not, we'll definitely have another video tomorrow morning talking all about any changes that have happened to Imelda. And as always, thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. Our next video will be tomorrow. There is a low chance of a live stream either Monday or Tuesday if Imelda does change tracks and maybe impacts the United States, so stay tuned for that. And we'll see you guys all again in the next video or live stream.